So when you have a ballot in front of you and you see an opportunity to vote for a levy, what does that even mean? I'm Jake Dawson. I am the vice chair for the Post Falls School District Board of Trustees.
And I'm Katie Ebner. I'm the CFO for the Post Falls School District, and I'm hoping to provide some facts about our levy.
Katie's kind of the master here. She knows all there is to know about school finances and levies and bonds and all that stuff. So I'm going to ask her some questions, and we're really excited to get some good information on how this all works. So Are you ready to dive in, Katie?
I'm ready.
Cool. Let's start with the first one. Why does the Post Falls School District need a voter-approved levy?
All right. So a few reasons. And usually when I hear this question, I just want to make it clear that Idaho funds differently compared to other states. And so what I mean by that, Idaho has the same sources of revenue as other states. So that would be state revenues, property tax revenues, and a little bit of federal revenues. So we're not different in that sense as to where the money comes from. It's how we get the money. So in another state, usually their property taxes are set by a formula that's in their laws. So the schools automatically get that property tax funding. In Idaho, school districts actually have to have a voted levy in order to receive the property taxes, all except for a very small portion of property taxes are approved by voters. So that is a huge difference. Many people are used to a state where the schools are just going to automatically receive that basic operational funding. So what I like to show as far as why Post Falls School District would need a levy, I like to show some charts as far as what statewide the funding looks like, just to show that Post Falls is not unique compared to other districts throughout Idaho. We use property taxes as a part of our operations budget, and it's a significant portion. So if you see statewide on this chart, they're 18% is the total for property taxes statewide, just as a, total between all the districts. And Post Falls actually relies on that revenue even a little bit less than that. We could sort of try and make that state money stretch even farther in order to give our local taxpayers some relief. So I think hopefully the takeaway is that the way that the Idaho system is set up, we have to go to voters in order to receive a portion of our operations budget.
So just to clarify, property taxes are what pay for our school operations and things like that, new buildings, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so is it 100%? It's not 100% funded by property taxes.
Right. And sort of a little bit of a history as far as Idaho school funding is helpful in understanding this. Back in 2006, or prior to 2006, the states funded schools, and then property taxes also made up a portion of school budgets. Those property taxes were automatically levied.
Gotcha.
So there was Idaho code that would fund the schools through property taxes. In 2006, the state legislature wanted to make a change in order to give some property tax relief. And that change, the source rather than property taxes was intended to be the increase in the sales tax. The only issue with that change was the increase in the sales tax was not enough to make up for all that levy revenue that districts were losing from the change. So it created this gap within the funding that a school district would just receive based on formulas and what we needed to operate. So that's where districts went to this supplemental levy model. And supplemental levies, we feel, sometimes it seems like a misnomer because you think of supplemental as above and beyond funding. Yeah, and so this truly isn't. This is making up for that gap that was created when the laws changed in 2006. So
Gotcha.
This is the means for districts to make up that gap.
Gotcha. How does the state calculate funding?
The state calculates funding. Their portion of the funding through enrollment is the primary driver for revenues. There are a number of other variables within the formula, but enrollment is sort of that that large variable that feeds into the formula that calculates our funding as far as the state side. Our actual costs do not come into consideration as far as what our funding is from the state. And so that's where there is an issue as far as it's sort of one size fits all statewide. And you're looking at districts all over the state that have very different economies they're operating in. For example, Post Falls is in a difficult position being so close to the Washington border. Being close to the Washington border, that's a whole different funding system. Teachers are compensated more over in Washington, and so having to compete with that makes it very difficult with the same funding that a district in another region that may not have that factor would be receiving. So that's sort of as far as state funding is, it is a one-size-fits-all formula. And I hinted at this gap between costs to operate in our state funding. And just to elaborate on this a little bit more, there are a number of places in our funding formula that have a gap. Salaries and compensation, which, for teachers competing with Washington, that's where there's a pretty large gap. We do pay teachers more.
So that comes out of our levy.
Right. The levy is what is helping fund that. Okay. And it's not just teachers. We have other staffing groups, our classified staff. We all know that bus drivers, that's been a very difficult place to recruit based on the wages that we were paying prior to the inflation that we have in our area. So we've had to sort of outpace what the funding is increasing as far as addressing some of those inflationary factors.
So, for example, I see that you have in here that the formula that they use funds 6% of elementary special education, correct? And we actually, our current special education is actually about 11%. So that supplemental levy has to create or come up with the other 5% needed to cover that. Right. Special education.
Right, okay. Right. So the formula,
and that's just one example.
Right. And
what this is for. So
yeah, this is another gap in state funding that the district is required to meet. So special education, those costs are legally required. When not every student comes to us, needing the same things. So one student may need costly one-on-one medical support when they're at school. One student may need a little bit of extra time with a paraprofessional. So there's a wide range of supports a student may need, but the issue is that the funding is not there as far as meeting that requirement, meeting these students' needs so they can reach their full potential. So.
Okay. Is that the only example of something that we pay for, and maybe you're going to cover this here shortly, but that we have to provide, a service that we have to provide that is not fully covered? Yeah,
transportation funding is another area. Okay. So we're legally required to transport students within, certain miles from the school, or if it's a dangerous crossing or something like that. But the state, while they do fund some for transportation on a reimbursement basis, many of the line items are reimbursed at 50%. So we have to look elsewhere as far as where are we going to get the funding to meet this legal requirement to get kids to school. We need to get kids to school if they don't have another way to get to school. So that's where the levy is going to help kind of close that gap in our budget.
Okay. Yeah, and we've already kind of dove into this a little bit, so let's continue. It's what do levy taxes actually pay for?
So essentially 11% of our operations budget is relying on levy taxes. And if you were in a situation where you were really good with your budget, but things were still tight and you lost 11% of your income, things would get serious pretty quickly. So that is sort of what the district's situation is what would we do if we didn't have this revenue is more of the question I think of when I'm coming at it from a finance point of view. So, and you might ask, what does it mean things get serious pretty quickly? And I try not to sound like I'm coming from a place of, oh, I want to scare everybody or doom and gloom or that sort of thing. But just from a financial aspect, losing 11% of our revenues when we're already running a very tight ship as far as minimizing costs as much as possible, that would put the district definitely in a financially precarious position.
Okay, so the 89%, or so you're not saying that. So 89% of our budget is made up of
State
okay,
revenues,
so
yeah.
state revenues,
Yeah.
and then so this other 11% that is much needed comes
Yeah,
from our levy.
from our supplemental
Okay.
levy. Yeah. So to talk about what it pays for, in reality, we have to look at the way I think about it is what we would lose, what we would have to cut in order to function with 11% less in revenue. And so what that would look like is we can't just say, well, transportation, we can cut there because we'll just have parents, we'll put that responsibility on parents. We legally cannot do that. We can't say, well, students may need services from specialists in schools. We'll just, sort of put that on pause for a little bit until we get our budget situation figured out. We can't do that. There are a number of legally required costs. So what we would look at is what's not legally required. Athletics and extracurriculars, they're not legally required, but they're super important to many students in order to keep them engaged in school. So there is no painless way to look at how would we operate without 11% of our budget.
So Katie, realistically, could we keep afloat for a little while without that 11%? Or
from a financial aspect, there are certain costs we could delay as a district. So let's say we don't buy buses for a couple years. Let's say we just put a pause on new curriculum. Maybe a maintenance project that, it's not fully fallen apart yet. We can just say, let's wait until we have funding. But that's never a good idea as far as managing a district and managing operations, because those costs can compound over time. If you're not keeping up on your bus replacement cycle, they're going to be more expensive later on, or the repairs are going to be costly, or you're going to be put in a bind where you can't find some lower cost buses because you had time to shop around. You're going to have to, when an engine blows, go and buy a bus that day, whatever you can get. So it's possible to potentially stay afloat for a short period of time, but long term for the district, losing 11% of our revenue is not something that would be sustainable.
What are just some other things within that list of like I see in here that safety and security is a number one priority, especially right now, with everything going on in our culture and stuff. So is there other things that are other examples you can give me that are like important that this 11% would help fund, and things specific to our district maybe? Or
so specific to our district, when the ballot is out, we per law, we now itemize our expenditures. And so taxpayers will see when they receive their ballot that K-Tech is funded through this levy. And so the districts, Lakeland, Coeur d'Alene, and Post Falls, created a consortium to create K-Tech, which is Kootenai Technical Education Campus, if anybody hasn't heard of that. It is a program that provides access to skilled trades for students, and so it creates a lot of opportunities for students who otherwise may have not been interested in what the programming was available to them. And also it creates a workforce in our community, so it benefits our community greatly. That would be an example of something that we would no longer be able to afford to send this supplemental levy money that we currently send over to K-Tech, and that would affect their budget greatly. Another area on the ballot is competitive salaries for teachers and staff. And so that's something I already mentioned. We pay more than what the state funds for all of our staffing groups. And so losing this extra to bridge that gap would mean we can't be competitive to get the best staff we can get, especially in our very competitive labor market right now.
Right. Yeah, and I know that you also mentioned, extracurriculars and sports and things like that too. So that's great. Thank you for covering that. So one comment I'll get from patrons, or I'll hear from patrons, and even within my own sphere of influence and peers and all that, is I hear a lot like it does seem like the district's always asking for more money every year. It's like, well, we need more, we need more, we need more. So can you help maybe address that comment at all, or?
Yeah. I think that perception is very valid as far as if you don't understand that this is, first of all, something we have to replace every 2 years. So the expiration, we don't have the choice of saying, okay, we're good. We had our supplemental levy passed and we don't need to go out to vote anymore. It expires. So we can't go for a longer term as far as funding these basic programs. So that's one piece of it people are going to see is, okay, this isn't a new tax every year. The district hasn't increased the supplemental levy since 2017, so it's been a flat amount brought to voters for quite a while. This year, we are proposing an increase on our ballot measure, and that would be just over $1 million in order to fund security. So there are some security projects that the district is hoping to undertake, remodeling some of the schools to have secure vestibules. We need to start to replace some cameras. Technology, unfortunately, doesn't have an unlimited lifespan. And so a lot of the cameras that have been installed over the years are coming up at the end of that lifespan. So we want to get ahead of that and begin replacement so we don't end up in a situation where a whole school's cameras go down, for example. We also want to add a police officer, a school resource police officer, to have just more coverage throughout the district. And we added this year campus safety officers at our elementary schools. And this would fund it. We were over the summer in a position where it was clear we needed to add something for elementary schools. So the decision was made to add those staff members. This levy would be the ongoing funding for those campus security officers. So the second reason why someone might think, oh, why are you asking for money every year, is that the misconception that this is above and beyond funding. So if you are familiar with another state's funding, you may only see a ballot measure when they're trying to build a new school, or there's a above and beyond program that the communities ask for. That is so if you're used to that sort of situation, you might assume, well, we're asking every 2 years for more and more money. No, this is the replacement of operational revenue with the security increases. And I just want to stress the security increases. Our district does a lot as far as security, and we want to do more. That's one of the basic needs. Kids need to feel and be safe at school. Staff need to feel and be safe at school before anything else can happen. So.
Yeah, that's good. So just to clarify, if we were to build a new building, because that may be a need for our district here very soon with our rapid growth and stuff. So a levy doesn't go towards that at all. It's strictly operational?
Right. So the levy that will be on the ballot is not for building anything. So that would be a bond measure, and kind of the easy way to remember it, we always say bonds are for building, levies are for learning. So the levy is to operate our schools. Now, as far as long-range planning and how they see us addressing the growth in our area as far as facilities and building, that would involve a bond measure, which would be a separate time to go to the voters to approve. So,
Gotcha. Great. Okay. So all this talk of levies and how we have to vote on it and stuff, how would that specifically affect property taxes, especially with, as assessed values increase and things like that? How does it personally affect property taxes?
Right. So we all had that shock over the summer opening up our assessed notice, and oh my, that is a lot higher than I expected. So that the good news there is, because the market is growing at a similar pace, means that the way that Post Falls School District levies taxes should remain flat as long as your assessed value is increasing at the same rate as the rest of the market. And we are seeing that the market is growing at a pretty consistent rate. There may be some outliers, like maybe, a house sold in your area and that boosted the numbers on your street, or you did an addition to your home. That would be a cause for an assessed value going up above the average market increase. But for taxpayers that are seeing the average market increase, we're seeing flat taxes, or in some cases just a little bit less, even though assessed values are increasing. And so this is really important to show as far as what the difference is. So this is something that's really good to show rather than project for taxpayers. And I want to show a real example of a taxpayer's bill in the area. And this is I looked at a number of data points throughout the district's market, and this one was sort of consistent with what I was seeing. They're all, within the ballpark. Everything isn't increasing at the same amount, but this one is pretty glaring because this taxpayer had an assessed value increase of 71%. So that's a very significant increase, but let's see what happens with their taxes. So tax year 2020, their assessed value was $343,360. So, back in 2020, that was what we were seeing. That wasn't a big surprise to open up that assessment notice. With a homeowner's exemption, you have a taxable value of $243,360. And so the tax rate for Post Falls School District, we're only looking at Post Falls School District taxes. On your tax bill, you may see other entities, for example, the county, city, a highway district. We're only looking at Post Falls School District taxes because that's what we can control. And so the tax rate here is applied to that taxable value in order to get the full year tax charge, which was $477. So if this individual had a mortgage payment, the monthly cost for Post Falls School District taxes is $40 a month. So if you're looking at the year 2021, they saw a modest increase as far as their assessed value, not, as high as we saw last year, but it was $394,490 was their assessed value, less the exemption. Apply that year's tax rate, and their taxes actually went down quite a bit, down to $375 per year. So they saw some monthly savings. They were at $31 a month for their Post Falls School District taxes. Going into 2022, that's the year we all had the shock, right? So this assessed value went up to $587,300. So that's up from $343,360, which is a 71% increase. So very significant increase. This individual is paying only $1 more a month for their tax charge for Post Falls. So even with that increase, it was up 48% from prior year. They're seeing about $1.32 months difference.
And just to clarify, that's state revenue. That's not the
This is the levy.
This would be the levy.
This is the property tax levy that people are seeing, and this is what the vote is on, this property tax levy.
Okay.
So for this Post Falls resident, their tax bill, their tax charge for the Post Falls School District actually decreased since 2020, 18%. And despite their assessed value going up by the 71%. So this was just hopefully to show that even though we're getting this shock as far as what our assessed values are, with the way taxes are set up for school districts, if your assessed value is going up the same as the rest of the market or within the ballpark, you're not going to see a very different tax charge year to year for your school district taxes. And so this is prior year data. I always like looking at prior year data because, if I talk about projections, people may question how I'm getting those numbers and that sort of thing. So I love looking at actuals, but looking forward to if this levy were approved, what would the effect be on the property taxes? And with projections as far as new construction in the area, adding to the market value, spreading that burden across more taxpayers, we are projecting flat taxes for the average taxpayer if this levy is on the property tax bills in the coming year. So
Great. So you talked about other states and kind of the differences there. Are our taxes that much lower compared to Washington?
Yeah, so we always like to look at Washington because they're our neighbors and they have such a different funding system. And I have, friends and family who have lived in Idaho and then for a job maybe moved to Spokane and maybe come back. And so you hear of my taxes are so high over there, my property taxes, and I think it is interesting to look at really what the difference is, that we are not Washington. We're really not anywhere near as far as what we're levying for school district taxes. So I put together this table to kind of say that for a home that is assessed at $600,000, which we're kind of seeing is what the average assessment is across town. Over in Central Valley School District, that taxpayer would pay $2,206 per year. So $184 a month in their mortgage into their escrow is going to be their property taxes for just the school.
And the 2,000 is just towards the school.
Yes. And so Post Falls School District, $401 a year, and so $33 a month for a $600,000 assessed value home. So compared to Washington, that would be almost $2,000 a year savings and $150 a month. So we are not Washington. We are trying to get by with as little as possible when it comes to property taxes.
How much of the staffing budget goes to administrative overhead?
Yeah, so that's always something that comes up during what talks about budget. Why don't you cut administration and then you can, afford to have these programs? And the reality in Post Falls is that 93% of our staff are student facing. These are individuals who are interacting with students all day long. And so I'm not saying that 93% of our staff are teachers. I'm saying that 93% of our staff are there to support kids in the schools. And so beyond teachers, that would be bus drivers. So, the first person to say hello to your kiddo in the morning and the last person to say have a good evening. So that kind of sets the tone for the day. Classroom aides. So that really makes the teacher's time efficient. So maybe a classroom aide can help work with a group of students that need some extra help in one area, and the teacher can do a targeted intervention or do some help or give some help with another group of students. So that kind of maximizes the efficiency of the teacher's time in the classroom and supports students. And we talk about school nurses. So kids may have a medical condition, a dangerous medical condition like diabetes, or may need just, to be monitored in order to stay healthy during the school day, may need medications during the school day. So nurses are there to ensure student safety. I know my son's come home with a sticker that said he bonked his head. I'm always glad that a nurse can kind of check him out and make sure it's nothing dangerous. So they also provide screenings for students to kind of make sure that everything, vision, hearing, like a scoliosis screening. So that's a huge thing for ensuring the health of our students. Special needs providers. So of course we have our special education teachers who are going to provide specialized instruction for students, whatever they need. We also have specialists like speech language pathologists. So that's making sure a student just has everything they need in order to succeed. And so I'm kind of listing out because people get maybe a little bit confused as far as what percent of the budget is teachers. We have so many more professionals we need in order to help a student succeed. And so going back to the 93%, well, where's the rest going? We have to have a payroll department. We have to, have accounts payable. We have to have an IT department. So those are the other areas of the kind of background overhead that we have for our budget. And it's the bare minimum in post-fall. So every dollar we can direct to what students need, that's where the money's going. So
Great. You mentioned earlier that the surrounding districts and Post Falls created a consortium for K-Tech. How does the supplemental levy support K-Tech specifically?
Yeah, so K-Tech cannot levy property taxes, and so the consortium that the different districts created, they levied some property taxes to build that facility, and their ongoing operations funding comes from the neighboring districts' supplemental levy, including Post Falls. So we pay K-Tech support in order to operate. And again, such an amazing program, provides something for students who definitely just have that interest and want to be in a skilled trade, and create such a benefit for our workforce and our community. So
yeah, that's great. I actually did that when I was in the district, so I do love that program. How about charter schools? How do they operate without levy dollars?
Yeah, this is a question I get pretty often, and it was something, honestly, I was curious about as well. Charter schools cannot levy property taxes. They receive state funding, and so how do they operate without that funding, which we have as part of our budget? And in looking through charter school budgets, there's a common denominator as far as when it comes to finances. Charters have a specialized program in most cases. So when you have, you don't have to provide a variety to meet every student who comes through your doors, meet them at their needs. When you have students who are opting into the program, that sort of specialized program, you can realize efficiencies within your budget. So the laws that school districts are subject to doesn't allow us to realize those same efficiencies. So transportation is one side of it. Charters aren't required to transport students, so we are. So that's going to be something that the levy is going to have to help as far as add to our budget. The different services, special education services, are going to be a big difference. And then the fact that we don't really choose who comes into our doors, as far as if we have a class that is, let's say we have first grade, it's every class is really at the max, and then we have more first graders come in right before school starts. We're going to have to add another section rather than say, okay, we're full, we can't. So those are the sort of efficiencies. I hate to say, we don't have the same efficiencies as a charter, but truly we can't realize those efficiencies based on the laws we have to follow.
It's helpful. That's good. So, yeah, I've heard this one a lot too. School districts, including Post Falls, received federal COVID relief funds when all that happened. Why can't the district just use that instead of running a levy?
Yeah. So that I've seen a lot of comments on social media about the federal COVID relief dollars and how they may be the replacement for other funding. And the one thing, there's actually a couple concerns with viewing those dollars that way. First of all, it's a federal grant. Federal grants have requirements, although it's not as many regulations as our other federal grants. The COVID dollars have to be used in order to respond to effects of COVID. So those are the strings attached with the dollars. And then on the financial management point of view, they're one-time dollars. So sometimes, during budget presentations or budget conversations, I'll sound like a broken record. You cannot use one-time money to replace ongoing revenues. And so that's sort of something that's always going to be on the table when you're looking at one-time revenues. And what did we spend them on? One-time revenues should be used to improve infrastructure. one-time costs, and we use those dollars to upgrade HVAC systems. That was an allowable cost for the COVID grants, and it's also a cost we already have. It's HVAC systems are incredibly expensive, and when they go down, you better have some money to repair them. So very grateful that we had that extra revenue to kind of get ahead of some of those repairs that we otherwise may have needed to run a bond for. So those COVID relief dollars went towards HVAC repairs. And then there were some situations where, because the labor market has gotten so tight, education has had a really difficult time through COVID. Staff have had to kind of change the way that they do things overnight and put in a lot of extra hours. We were looking at recruitment and retention stipends. So quite a bit of the COVID dollars have gone to just trying to keep good staff, trying to recruit the best staff in a time when it's really, really difficult to hire. So
just to clarify that too, the COVID money, the money that came from the COVID funds, did have stipulations of what you could spend that money on.
Right.
So even within, I mean, we kind of, you guys kind of had to use what the money within the realm of what you were allowed to spend that on, and it still only covered really things that we needed in that moment. It wasn't like something that you could span on for years to come. It needed to be used. How about sorry, I'm kind of going off script a little bit, but how about was cleaning materials and stuff increase and things that you had to have?
Yeah, we definitely had to put in more labor hours as far as ensuring that the schools were deep cleaned more often. It was hard to find custodial services, so looked to contracted services in order to ensure we were, sanitized enough to operate. And so there were a number of costs that kind of went that way. The costs that already exist, but were just made so much higher by COVID. Okay. So
we've talked about a lot in this time, which has been great. It's been educational for me too. Can you summarize kind of the main misconceptions that you hope to address?
Yeah, so the main misconceptions I hear out there whenever I'm talking to someone about the levy is, first things first, Idaho is funded differently from other states. So this is not above and beyond revenue. This is our operational revenue, keeping the lights on, the doors open, providing the level of services, the level of education that our community is experiencing and it expects from us. So this is not above and beyond like you might see it on a ballot in another state. And then the next one is taxes. So people are concerned about their property taxes. We talked about, what that assessed value increase means, and that for our district's patrons, tax bills, even with this increase of just over $1 million, they should see their tax bills relatively flat. So the average taxpayer, if their assessed value is going up as in a similar way to their neighbors, are going to see relatively flat taxes from the school district portion of their property taxes. And then the last one is just knowing what this levy pays for. This levy is for kids, and we have a special focus on this renewal for safety and security of our students. So
maybe you can comment on this if you know. What is Post Falls relatively similar to our other districts too, as far as what they're requesting for levies? And
yeah, so Post Falls is one of the lowest percent of the supplemental levy of their overall operations budget. So definitely
as related to the whole state or our local district, or do you know that?
Statewide average, we are lower, and then it's lower than our neighboring districts as well. So
and we're a pretty large district.
Yeah. So, and it's more, not every district's the same size. So I look at it as a proportion of their overall operations budget. But the reliance on these dollars, we talked about what it would look like without that 11%, the reliance is lower than the statewide average as well as our neighbors. So.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Katie. I had a great time, and like I said, it was very educational for me, and hopefully it will be for our patrons or for our community. As we said before, we just really wanted to provide an informational video and opportunity for you as our community and the voters who are going to need to vote on this in March. Correct?
Yep.
So this will be on the ballot in March. We hope that this is informational for you just on and helpful on making a decision on how you're going to vote. So we thank you, and thank you, Katie. Thanks for all this.
Thanks so much, Jake.
Yeah.